I've been wanting to do a video on computer components for a while, but every time I try to make a video, but I felt like I had too much info on, and the video ended up being an hour long, or I tried to condense it and simplify it, and it wasn't informative enough, so I decided instead to make a series out of it. Today we're going to be talking about computer components, specifically processors. Processors are one of the most important components in your computer, whether you be gaming, writing a script for YouTube video, or even just turning on a computer. The processor or CPU is working the longest and sometimes the hardest. Now, what exactly is a CPU? A processor is the logic circuitry that responds to and processes the basic instructions that drive a computer. The four primary instructions of a processor are fetch, decode, execute, and write back. Now, we aren't going to get into those four sections that much, but I can scratch the surface a little bit. Fetching is generally the retrieval of information from the RAM. Decode is exactly what it sounds like. Ones and zeros are decoded to understand what action is being asked to take. Executing is simply performing the operation, and write back is essentially the confirmation of the action being carried out. Now, I know that could be a bit daunting, but trust me, the hard part should be over. The point of this video is to make understanding processors as simple as possible. Think of them of the human body. You have your arms, legs, spine, stomach. While the computer is not unlike a human body. The processor being the brain, the part of the body that receives information and puts it to good use. But there are more things that you should know about them we're gonna cover them all. The first one is socket. See, a lot of PC components are extremely compatible, but there are a few that will not work together. The type of socket your processor is very important. So what is a socket? Well, the socket is the component on a motherboard that provides the physical and electrical connections to a CPU, essentially the housing for your processor, and different processors have different size sockets. Well, how do I ensure that I don't buy the wrong processor for my motherboard? Well, they made it quite simple. First of all, an AMD processor will not fit into a board design for an Intel chip. Similarly, a socket labeled 1155 will only house processors with the same label. So if you buy a 2011 processor, all you have to do is, and if you purchased a 2011 motherboard as well, the labels are very easy to find, and if you ever need a compatibility check, PCPartPicker.com has a built-in compatibility detector to find out if your components do not match and won't work. The next aspect about processors that you should know is something called a gigahertz. A gigahertz is a rating that defines a frequency of calculation cycles within a second. 1 gigahertz is equal to 1 billion cycles per second. A cycle is defined as the process of fetching an instruction from software and executing the desired calculation. Now let's try to simplify that a bit more, though. Let's say you have a processor running at 4.0 gigahertz. This means the processor has a clock that beats 4.0 billion times per second. Each clock beat represents an opportunity for the processor to manipulate a number, if bits equivalent to its capacity. 64-bit processors can work on 64 bits at a time, while 32-bit processors work on 32 bits at a time. So essentially, two processors could both be running at 4 gigahertz. But if one is 32-bit and the other is 64, the 64-bit will be able to work through more bits. This is why it's important to measure more than just gigahertz when looking for processors. The last two are core and thread. A core is basically an individual CPU that may be combined to form a multi-core CPU, which has become the norm and a standard for processors, as you're probably familiar when looking at processors. I'm not good at processors. You'll see quite a few to say dual core, meaning there are 2 cores, and quad core, meaning there are 4 or the more cores. Typically means the more effective. Multitasking, as every program, every window, every game will absorb a core looking at you. Google Chrome, it takes a lot. I wrote this on Google Chrome, the script, and it lagged a lot. Just saying. Probably my computer though. But these programs will only use a percentage of that core, which you actually manage and review in the task manager. Now, what are threads? Threads, also known as intelligent scheduling, prepares information for the core even if the core is occupied. Basically, the core is always processing information, but with one thread it can only shovel so much info its way. 2 threads means information is always available for the core to work with, and no matter how fast or slow the core is, it always has information to work on. It makes things more efficient. Now, there is a myth that a processor with 4 cores but 8 threads makes the processor an 8 core, but that's actually not true. The processor will work far more efficiently than a quad core without hyper-threading, but it does not magically convert the processor into an octa-core. The only way to do that is by an octa-core. Think of it as though you're firing a pistol. You fire a pistol every second at the bullseye. The bullseye is the core, the bullet is the information, and the gun is the thread. One thread will offer 1 bullet per second, whereas if you had 2 pistols and you fired them one after another, more information within that 1 second can reach the core. There are many different processes to look into, some made for gaming and others made for work, and it's important to do research before just grabbing one and going. No matter what you're building a computer for, there's a CPU out there that's right for you, but it can be a difficult process. If you ever need some help, don't forget to check some online threads, and as always, I will see you next time.